Hello, guys, how are you? Welcome to the week number 10 of our course of psycholinguistics. Hope everything's good on your side. We're going to do this week something sort of special. We are going to skip certain topics. Let's say that we are still in the first part of the course. We're still missing a couple of topics over there that we will see, I think, next week. So I'm going to change a little bit the order because I am interested in you guys to having this information so you can work with it and start working in the final project, right? I am going to have a meeting with you. I guess that by the time that you watch this video, you already will have had that meeting. And the idea is that I will have explained already that you are supposed to have certain options and different things, okay? So these topics that we're going to cover this week are most of what you're going to need for your observation, right? The idea is that if you can, of course, check the topics this week, you're going to be able to start working on that, progressing, because we have about 4 weeks, or, well, 4-5 weeks content this one, in order to finish that and to do the observations and everything else, okay? So as I mentioned, we're going to skip into the slide number 47. Sorry to do not produce any poems this week. I think that this one is particularly important, so I want to take every single minute of this class for this. I promise that I'll return with them next week. I don't think nobody's going to miss them anyway, but well, let's make it a habit. In this case, we're going to deal with language acquisition. Remember that when we were analyzing the branches of psycholinguistics, we cover this one. We have a general explanation, and that's it, right? So let's say that this branch deals with different fundamental questions, right? Questions that have not been completely answered, yes, and that let's say that have only partially been solved, and that I invite you guys to search them and think about them and discuss them and research about them, because they are really important, right? So some of these central questions are these four, the ones that you see over there in the slide. The first one is the question of modularity, yes, and what does it mean? What does it mean when you have, for example, modular furniture? It is a desk, library, or something similar that has like different parts. They have instructions, you put them together, and all these isolated parts sort of compose a whole functional system, right? So that is modularity in terms of language, right? Like, is it somehow true? Is it somehow effective or tested that our language learning is modular, that it is composed as in the, let's say, intangible part, and as well as the physical part, by different components, by different modules. So let me give you an example. Let's say, do we have in our brain sections that are in charge of different parts or different functions, or does the whole brain like works at the same time? Yes. So, well, as I mentioned before, these are partially answered. We now know with a certain level of security or certainty that for sure there are different areas of the brain that deal with different things, such as memory, emotions, transmission of certain specific messages, etc. But we also that at the same time, even though we have all these different zones in the brain, well, the brain is usually used simultaneously. Yes, it's used completely, 100%. So we have this myth that if we could use the 100% of our brain, like we will be super powerful and, I don't know, have telekinetic powers or have telepathy or something like that. And well, that is just something that is not true. We most of the times use 100% of our brain. So modularity is important. I mean, the different parts, but also how they associate and work together. So next time that you see that meme of what if I use 100% of our brain, well, the answer is you will be a functional normal human. If you're using less than that, okay. So that about modularity in physical terms. I was talking about the brain, and of course the central neural system. Now, in intangible things, let's say that we're going to dealing with experience, like what, let's say, are the parts that compose our language acquisition, right? So, is it more important the repetition that my mother or my parents or my caregiver give to me? Is it more important what I listen, for example, on the TV? On the radio, environmental sounds, again, all the different things that the infant produces on his own or her own. Well, again, we have a more or less certain somehow answer for that. We know nowadays that all of those experiences are very, let's say, important in order to develop certain linguistic skills. And also, well, they may be more or less influential, also depending on the affection that the kid at some point develops. Now, this affection is a really subjective and abstract conception, but what I can tell you is that, for example, it has to do with how relatable it is for an infant, how he perceives another person. Yes, like as closer, as somehow friendly or nice to be around, or maybe the opposite, right? So that's a little bit what we can say about modularity. All these different like components that put together or added together like help us to acquire the knowledge, right? Now, human uniqueness. Is language something exclusive of humans, human beings? And well, do not talk about communication, because let's say that is pretty clear. Let's say almost every species in the world, and even has been debated that some plants, yes, or some herbal beings or vegetables, or well, no, vegetables is not the word. Vegetals, I think it is. Yes, not vegetables. Vegetables is a different thing. Vegetal beings such as plants and some other configuration of vegetal life, well, they communicate. Yes, so it's a fact that there are ways in which dogs and cats and rats and ants and many other species communicate. Right now, there's a difference between communicating somehow by means of smells, scents, certain calls. That is communicating, but it's different, like to affirm that animals, for example, may have language. Well, that is something different, right? So again, let's say that there's a certain amount of accuracy in the affirmation that language is not unique of humans. Yes. So however, there in the picture, a question that says, do chimps or gorillas have language? Yes, they do. Let's say that they have their own coded and until certain point complex set of signals, grunts, noises that they produce that somehow are able to be considered a language. Now, they are even able to communicate with humans by means of sign language, right? With their hands. So, of course, that is something that they have been taught, and that's a different thing. But that sort of my point over there is that it shows how it's possible that somehow, animals that are relatively close to us, genetically speaking, are able to develop their language, right? We also talk about it at the beginning on the first part of the course about language and thought, and it's how we see that our ideas become eventually sounds, and how those sounds or text, I mean written text, make sense for other people or among each other, right? And again, many of you produce really interesting theories and ideas when we were initially speaking about it, and it's how all these neural impulses created by neurons and our central nervous system go through a whole and really quick. It's somehow really fast how these ideas and somehow ethereal, if we want to call it in that way, ideas that we have in our brain, like eventually go through specific zones of our brain, and this that is somehow intangible, that is merely energy, if we want to call it that way, electric impulses, and eventually they enter into contact with physical parts of our brains, organs, tissue, until it'll eventually become, let's say, language in a scenarios way, or in a written way, right? So it's a little bit like that. Of course, it's much more complex than it. And there's lots of things that we still cannot explain. Yes, it's even though we try to, let's say, as human beings, to arrive to a point on the explanation of certain phenomena that try to be completionist or comprehensive. Well, we're still missing certain things. Of course, it is much more complete than I just mentioned over here, and then you could just read treatises on neurological impulses and some of these different things, but in general terms, that is what we can say about this, right? And then there is the question about language acquisition of learning versus innateness, right? And what is something innate? Well, something that you come programmed with, yes? You don't need to learn it, because somehow your brain is already wired in order to produce that sort of skill, yes? So many people would say, oh, he's an innate singer, because since very, very little, the kid was able to produce musical sounds, and it sounded like somehow on key and all these different things. Or I don't know, he's an innate sportsman, because apparently since he was really little, the kid is really athletic and really gifted somehow for sports. So this is the innate thing, right? Something that, according to the theory, you are born with. You don't need to really learn. Unlearn, well, of course, is the other way, no? Let's say this idea that proposes that we are somehow devoid of a certain skill, and by means of practicing it, studying it, repeating it, applying methodologies that help us perfect it, we are going to eventually learn it. Yes, and we already took like a long time talking about learning and the theories, right? So there's this discussion now between are we able to speak from the very beginning and develop a language, or do we have to learn? Yes. And well, the impulse of many people will be saying, well, no, it is innate, because no matter that if you don't go to school, you will eventually know how to communicate and know how to somehow, if you have the oral abilities and the, let's say, a minimum amount of adaptability, you're going to be able to communicate, right? But they forget that you don't learn in school only, right? That all the other part, like all the imitation part, the moment in which parents took care of you, you had exchange with certain things, that's somehow the way in which you can also learn, right? So there's this classical experiment that was proposed in antiquity, and that I am completely suspectful that actually somebody did it at some point in history, right? That says that there was this philosopher who wanted to know about this, about how innate or learned was language, right? Was language. So legend says that he took it to a deserted island and put it over there, right? And he fed him, and people somehow took care of him, but they never like utter a word. They never communicated with him like explicitly, mention anything, produce any sound, nothing like that. Yes. So apparently it was impossible to learn, right? The result of this apparently fantastic experiment was that the kid eventually started like creating somehow his own language, or his own ways to communicate. That of course was not elaborate, but it was again based on grunts, noises, and different similar things, right? So that will disprove that we have anything that is innate. Nevertheless, again, we cannot deny that there are certain innate things in the way in which our physical, let's say, apparatus is somehow composed. Talking about the brain, the nervous system, our muscles, let's say, our mouth and throat and vocal cords configurations. That's something that you cannot learn, something you are born with, and somehow predisposes you to communicate in certain ways. Yes, if we were born without a mouth or vocal cords or some other things, we will have maybe another innate mechanisms to communicate. So bottom line, let's say that there's a little bit of innate in our language learning that cannot be undeniable, but that most of it is learned. Okay. Very well, guys, so let's go to this part that it's really important. Remember that when we're going to have the discussion, I will mention that the best subjects to observe are between 0 and 36 months. Those are the ones, or the months in which we find like the most important, not really important, but the most noticeable and the most changeable characteristics, right? Like once the kid arrived at the 36 months, basically he will be able to acquire more vocabulary, more fluency, and more conceptual abilities, right? But let's say the most important, or the most noticeable again, the most noticeable advances, changes, characteristics happen in this period, right? So as you can see, I put over there like three. Yes, there are three, right? Mm-hmm. 3 different questions. It says, is there clear boundaries? So it means, is there like a really clear separation between one stage and the next? And the answer is no. Okay. I am going to give you over here certain general months in which certain characteristics, linguistic ones, are supposed to happen, right? But they may not. Yes, they may not, and they may be probably happening the next stage or before or something like that, and that doesn't mean that the kid it's either behind, it's either lacking in intelligence or lacking in normality, or if he does it before, it doesn't make him a genius or something like that. Not at all. Like, it's pretty common that we have this little overlapping of stages. The second one, it's strict sequence. So we are supposed to have one thing first, then the next, the next, the next, the next. Not really, right? They may happen in different orders. Yes, they may, as you can see, overlap. If you take a look, for example, in the slide, in the number 48, if you take a look at the vegetative sounds, you see that they may be happening at the same time that the comfort sounds or the vocal play, right? Maybe one thing happens first, maybe the other happens next. Maybe he, for some reason, like acquires one of the behaviors on the 17 of the expected, let's say 12 months, yes, or 11 months, much before. So there's not really a strict sequence over here. And are they the same length? So they are supposed to last the same? No. Again, it may happen that, for example, a kid like goes to the first stage that is supposed to last about 6 months. Probably he or she could experience that in 3 months. Does it really quickly, or maybe in 6 months. Yeah. So in each subject, the variations or the lengths of these different stages, it may be different. So it's really important to take this into account, unless we have a really important delay. Let's say that we shouldn't worry, or unless we have a really significant advance in conceptualization. We are not supposed to believe that the kid's a genius or gifted kid in terms of somehow intelligence, right? Like, it happens a lot. Like moms and dads and brothers and aunts compare kids all the time. And also, what's your kid doing? Oh, he's saying da and ma. Oh, really? Because mine is counting until 10. Well, congratulations, great. What do you want me to do? Give you a medal? It really is not either very impressive. We're capable of doing that at certain ages, and let's say counting doesn't necessarily mean that you associate that with the concept of quantity. Even though, if I don't know, if you do this or this or this, probably it's just like a trained behavior and not necessarily the conceptualization of quantity and knowing what does 1 or 2 or 3 represents, even if you say it in English, in Spanish, whatever. Yes, because grown people are like that. They love like to, when they're in a party or a family meeting, to bring the little kid and say, okay, come on, now you're going to tell the numbers. And the kid is 1, 2, 3. And everybody applauds, and that's nice. You can do that. That's good. I'm not criticizing the fact of doing it, because it's nice and it feels like the kid is really enlightened, right? What I want you to be sure about is that doesn't necessarily represent a huge advance in terms of linguistic, or more importantly, conceptual somehow stages. Okay. Well, guys, so we're going to leave it like that for this video. In the next one, we're going to concentrate on specifically the different stages that we're going to cover, okay? Thanks a lot. See you on the next one. Bye-bye.